Welcome to another episode in our series, Did You Know? About all things South African. We will talk about our people, our country, and systems in our country. And today we are definitely going to talk about systems or a system. Now, almost on every tour that I have conducted, we go either to the Union buildings in Pretoria or Cape Town's Parliament buildings, or sometimes both. Both beautiful buildings. But unfortunately, it is not the buildings, or fortunately, it's not the buildings that govern us, but the people inside the buildings. Now, having grown up under the previous system, I found it quite hard to learn about our new system. And that is why I invited our guest today, Nicola du Plessis. Now, Nicola is currently a PR counselor in the city of Johannesburg, but previously she also traveled all over the country to teach people about our government system. So, Nicola, I'm going to ask you quite a few questions, and please don't think I'm completely idiotic, but I definitely have a lot of questions still to ask. But let us start by explaining our government system, the spheres of government. We have got different spheres of government. And I used to say levels of government, but I think spheres describes it a lot better because they are interrelated and interdependent, aren't they?
Yes, Joleen, they definitely are. And for most people, our system of government is complicated.
Yeah.
But the foundational element of it is that we all work together in the different spheres of government to ensure that service delivery takes place on both national level and provincial level, and local level.
So those are the three spheres. So the national one, the provincial one, and then the local one.
Yes.
And they operate together?
They do. Very in each of the spheres that ensures that there's communication happening between the spheres. So I'll start with our national lawmaking body, which is Parliament, which has two houses of Parliament. One is the National Assembly and the other one is the NCOP, or National Council of Provinces.
Okay.
The National Council of Provinces' responsibility is to ensure that what is happening in National Assembly gets communicated to our provincial level, which is our provincial legislatures. From the provincial legislatures, we then have various local municipalities. There are three categories of local municipalities, A, B, and C. One is metro.
Yeah, that's already complicated for me.
It is quite complicated. And the different categories of municipality depends on your population size.
Okay.
So we have a few metros within South Africa, one being the city of Johannesburg, another being city of Cape Town, Mangaung or Bloemfontein, Ekurhuleni, as well as eThekwini, Durban.
Mm-hmm.
We also have our local municipalities, which is our B categories. Those are the smaller municipalities. And then we have what we call district municipalities, and those are mainly found in the Western Cape, but they are in other provinces as well, and they manage a few local municipalities under them. So the area where you live in, which is Swartland, has both a local municipality as well as a district municipality overseeing the function of local government.
Okay, right. So I want to go one step back and then come to the basic level, the local level. I said that you are a PR counselor. What is that?
Yes. So more often than not, I get that question from my activists as well as all voters. And the vast majority of people don't know what a PR counselor is, or proportional counselor, as the full word is. So I will try to simplify, because again, I'd have to go to a larger perspective. Each municipality has an X amount of wards. Each one of those wards represent a seat in the council. That is a ward councillor, and they become responsible for their specific ward. In the voice, or in the spirit of democracy, we have put in quite a few fail-safes to ensure that the voice of the minority is also heard. And that is where the proportional councillor comes in. Proportional seats within category A municipalities, metros, as well as category B, which is municipalities, a differentiation of 50 seats or 50% of the seats go to ward councillors and 50% of the seats are proportional councillors. So if you have 50 wards in your municipality, you'll have 50 ward councillors and 50 proportional or PR councillors. The PR councillor's job is fundamentally to do oversight and to represent the community and to be opposition within their allocated wards. Usually the political parties allocate specific wards to proportional councillors.
So you mentioned oversight over?
Oversight over the governing party within that ward. So whichever ward won that, or whichever political party won that ward, the PR councillor would be an opposition politician to the governing ward councillor in that ward.
To see that service delivery takes place.
Yes, yes.
Good.
And it is a very important differentiation, but this is more campaigning. PR councillors' responsibility is to ensure that service delivery takes place through effective opposition, not necessarily as a center of their job, where ward councillors' central job and responsibility is to look after their ward.
Okay, so but the voters don't determine who the ward councillors or the PR councillors are. I mean, when we now vote in the local elections later this year, will I be able to vote for a specific person?
Again, a more complicated question. But basically, the voters vote for, if you look at a ward, and the majority of the voters in that ward vote for a specific party, let's say Party Z, that will then be a ward councillor within that ward, because the voters have spoken and the majority of the voters want that specific party to represent them in council.
Okay.
We look at proportional councillors. We look at the entire municipality's votes, and if 40% went to a specific political party, which let's say it's Party W, 40% of the PR seats go to that specific political party. So the voters not only vote for their ward councillors, they also vote for the proportional councillors. And that is an oversight of the entire municipal election or results.
Okay, so in the local election that we have later this year, we will vote not only for the province, but we'll also vote for our local government.
Unfortunately not. We will only be voting. We will only be voting for local government elections. So it's called LGE, Local Government Elections 2021. We are all hoping that it will happen.
Okay.
But when it does happen, it is purely for local government. We do have, so every 5 years, there's a local government election, and in different 5-year time span, there is a national government election, and within the national government election, you vote for your province as well. The previous one that we had in 2019.
So we lost you?
Apologies, where did you lose me?
Yeah, you said that the local government elections happen every how many years?
Every 5 years.
Okay.
So we have one in 2021 this year, and then in a different time set, we have our national government elections that include your provincial elections as well. The last one was in 2019, so the next one will be in 2024.
Okay. So provincial, I'm just going to reiterate here, so it's a completely separate election when you vote for your local people.
Yes, yeah.
And then a separate election for your provincial and the national.
Yes, so you'd get at the national government elections, the NGEs, you'll get 2 ballots. One ballot is for your national vote, and one ballot is for your provincial vote. Okay,
right. And then, how is the provincial government structured, and what is their task? I mean, what are they in charge of, if you can say that?
So the short answer to that is they are in charge of all things provincial, and they have a specific mandate. To become slightly more technical, It is in Schedule 4 and 5 of our Constitution, and their mandates cover various hospitals that are in the provincial mandate, schools, not tertiary education systems, that is a national competence. They also cover social development that is within their domain as provincial legislatures, and they ensure that provincial government works well and that provincial competencies are addressed.
Okay. So when people complain about something like the railway system or the police, that is not provincial, is it?
Neither one of them are provincial. They're both national competencies. But yet a complication to policing is when we look at the province does have a say within policing, but it ultimately lies within national. However, within metros, we have Metro Police, which is separate to the SAPS, the South African Police System.
Right. But like you said, health in general, is there a national health department and also a provincial one? And they are interrelated.
Yes. So we have national hospitals. They usually are the more academic hospitals. Then we have provincial hospitals. They will be our provincial competencies. And then we do have local or district clinics for very basic community health services that fall under the purview of metros and district municipalities.
Good. Okay. Well, that gets a little bit clearer here. Now let's go to national.
Yes.
So that is our highest form of government, and that is the body that is responsible for making the laws, right?
The national laws.
Oops. Okay, there we go again. Can we just then step back and talk about anything that is not a national law?
Yes. So within lawmaking, we have national laws and we have provincial laws and we have municipal laws that are known as bylaws.
Okay.
So vast majority of South Africans are aware of what the bylaws are, and they are determined within your local municipal council. Mm-hmm. Then we have the provincial laws, and the decisions that are jointly made with Parliament as well as province or national and province are things like agriculture, health, housing, environment, and education. But again, education. The laws that are made purely by the provincial legislature and not in conjunction necessarily with national government would be provincial roads, traffic, liquor licensing, provincial planning, and provincial sport. Those bills obviously need to comply with what is decided on a national level, but they are a purely provincial competency.
Aha. Okay. Now, how do you become a member of Parliament? I mean, those people, how many are there? 400 members of Parliament?
Yes, of National Assembly, yes.
In the National Assembly, right. Okay, and then there's the NCOP as well, and there are also a number of members in the NCOP, so they're separate from the House of Assembly.
Yes, they actually have a separate house and a separate room that they meet in. To explain the complication of the NCOP will take a little bit longer, because they then have various representatives from provinces coming in, as well as SOLGA representatives who represent the municipalities. And that is in an alternating system. They do have their regular system, or their regular, the members who are regular members. And the NCOP, as I said earlier on, discuss bills that have been passed in Parliament that have an impact on province, as well as all money bills. And just before I answer the question of how do you become a member of Parliament, I just want to say the importance is to know that Parliament makes decisions of national importance. So it would be, for example, the national economy, the treasury. And I was about to complicate that and say there's the Division of Revenue Act, which determines which revenue goes to provinces and which revenue goes to municipalities, and how and in which line items that gets spent. But also, for example, State-owned enterprises are determined by National Assembly, and how state-owned enterprises are determined. And the importance for that is ESCOM.
Uh-huh. Well, one of those interesting ones.
Yes, and
SAA,
Transnet and
yeah,
SAA and
yeah.
Denel and AlexCorp, and yes.
I'm itching to ask you about tourism, but we're not going to go down that route.
So tourism is a very interesting competence or mandate. So it sits with national, and province and council don't have a direct mandate to speak to it. However, they do have a mandate to make their areas more tourist friendly. So they do, for example, have heritage portfolio committees that ensure that should ensure that heritage sites are looked after.
That's the provincial.
That's provincial and in metros.
Ah, good. Okay. Well, at least there is something. But just a very stupid question once again. We don't vote for the NCOP, do we?
We do.
Oh.
Just before, and I think I can answer that question by explaining how members of parliament are in fact elected.
Okay.
So, separate to the previous dispensation, which was a Westminster model, which focused on constituency votes, we now have what we call a representative democracy. So we vote for A, the political party, and B, the provincial votes count towards province, and the national votes count towards representation in National Assembly. This means that it is the responsibility of the political party to determine the best candidates to send forward as candidates. So unlike, for example, America, where they vote for the individual linked to a party, we here vote for the political organization rather than an individual. There are various conversations for electoral reform, but as it stands now, that is our voting system. It also implies that you may only stand as a member of parliament if you are a member of a registered political organization at the IEC.
Okay.
Which is also part of the conversation, and they are looking towards independent candidates, but that is an entirely different conversation.
Sure.
But it comes down to the fact, so it comes down to your political party then ranks you on a list. And let's say you get 40 seats in parliament, the top 40 of that list that is submitted to the IEC way before the election, those 40 people take up seat in parliament.
Okay. How do you know how many seats there will be available for a specific political party? Does that only happen after the elections?
Yes, it happens once we've counted, and it depends on the percentage of the votes.
Of
so
the
if
votes
one political So if one political party on a national level gets 60% of the votes, 60% of the overall seats go to that political party. And one seat is approximately 40,000 votes.
Okay, so 40,000 votes, one person in parliament.
Yes, and the responsibility of a public representative is they carry the voice of those 40,000 people with them.
Okay, that's interesting. You just mentioned the IEC. Just quickly tell me, what is the IEC?
So the IEC is the Independent Electoral Commission. They are non-partisan, which means they do not have any political affiliation. They are one of the Chapter 9 institutions that ensures democracy happens within South Africa. Another example of the Chapter 9 institution would be the Public Protector, as well as the Human Rights Commission. The IEC acts independently of any political interference, and they have incredibly strict processes to ensure that there is no vote rigging.
Okay.
The IEC also, interestingly, if you'd like to know, on a local government election, they also determine together with the demarcation board, actually it's more the demarcation board, the boundaries of your wards, and the demarcation board then determines the boundaries of province.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. And how are they funded? Do political parties pay them? Does government pay them?
The taxpayers fund them by and large. However, each political party has to pay a registration fee at every election.
Ah, okay. Well,
I am
that
uncertain about the amount, but it's not a small amount.
oh, okay, fine. All right. So now let's get back to Parliament. We often
Yes.
hear the stories of caucuses, of portfolio committees, and things like that. What is that?
So, it's a caucus is a party structure. It has nothing to do with the legislature, but they are members of that specific legislature. When I say legislature, I refer to council, provincial legislature, national assembly, or NCOP, so legislative bodies.
Okay.
Um, and it is a grouping of like-minded people in that legislature. So, for example, if you have Party C and they all of the members in that legislature or in Parliament of Party C form Party C's caucus.
Okay. So you get selected by your party to become part of that party's caucus.
Yes and no.
Oh my word. Okay. I'm
So
trying.
when you get sworn in as a public representative, you are automatically part of that caucus for your political party.
Yes.
So yes, initially before the voting happened, your party determined who was ranked on the list.
Okay.
And the successful public representatives become caucus members.
Okay, so if Party C has got 6 members in Parliament, there will be 6 members in their caucus,
Yes.
and that's party specific.
Yes.
All right.
That is
PC,
where you strategize.
yeah.
That is where you make decisions. In council, you can call for a caucus break at any time, and you have to give a predetermined amount of time. So you have to say, could we have a 30-minute caucus break? And once you come back, your chief whip of your party, not of the legislature, of your party, has to report back to the speaker.
What you've discussed in caucus. Okay. So in other words, when there is a law that you don't agree with, the party can leave the meeting and say and ask for a caucus break, and then they can discuss it and come back with a solution or a specific objection.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Now the portfolio committees. What are
So,
those?
so portfolio committee is basically where the nuts and bolts of any legislative body happens. So I'm going to speak about National Assembly more specifically. So you have what you call the plenary session.
Mhm.
And the plenary session is when all members of parliament are together in the House. Then you have various departments and various competencies. So, for example, you have energy or you have higher education, and they then have committees. The committees are populated on a representative way. So it depends on the amount of votes your political party got, with the amount of seats that you receive within your portfolio committee. It is in the portfolio committee that the initial conversations about lawmaking happens, about how, so the portfolio committee gives the political directive of how a specific government department needs to function.
Oh, so quite important.
Very. And that is, in a portfolio committee, that is where most of your legislative work would take place.
So,
And
so,
no,
carry on.
not a problem.
So, in other words, the portfolio committee meets regularly to discuss certain issues around that specific department.
In theory, yes, they should.
Okay, but they don't.
Many, it does depend on your committee chair, and I'll explain how a committee chair is selected. But it depends on your committee chair how often they set up meetings. You do have to have at least a meeting at least once a month. And the parliamentary committee meetings or portfolio committee meetings ordinarily are open to the public.
They are open to the public?
Ordinarily, you do have to apply.
Okay. So, in other words, if I want something to be changed, I go to the portfolio committee and make suggestions.
You can, if you get a chance to speak, And also when they open up a bill is basically a draft law for public participation. Our government is created so that public participation takes place, and it does depend on active citizenry, but yes, you can have an input to that. There is another very interesting part, well, for me, very interesting part about Parliament. It's called a private members bill.
Okay.
And a private members bill doesn't necessarily, so ordinarily a bill has to go through the portfolio committee to get onto the agenda to vote in plenary. A private members bill is any member of Parliament can create a bill and get it onto the agenda for plenary to discuss.
For plenary to discuss. So, okay.
And vote on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then there's time that the public, that you and me can, not you but me, can give input into that.
And they do have to advertise that, but it is something that you can keep track of. The parliamentary website often does advertise when they have public participation sessions.
Okay. So something that I was also not clear about, if it's not a law yet, it is called a bill, right?
Yes.
And then once it's gone through all the processes and everybody's put their rubber stamp on it and the president has signed it, it becomes an act.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
So,
there one or two additional things, but the principle you have down pat, yes.
Okay, right.
There is also an interesting thing that if a bill or an act is not constitutional, if it doesn't, so for example, within our constitution, we do not believe in the death penalty, and the constitution actually protects the right to live. If a bill passes Parliament and it doesn't pass constitutional muster, it doesn't matter. That bill doesn't get promulgated.
Good. Okay. So right. So I'm a lot wiser now. But now let's get back again to Parliament. How many political parties are there? I believe there's 13, 14. I'm not
13.
Sure.
13. Yes.
Oh wow. Okay. And
we are a robust democracy, and we are a young democracy. And within young democracies, there is a tendency towards multiple parties. There's various schools of thought about if one should have a dual party system or if you should have multiple party system as we do in South Africa.
Okay, right. Can you, and I know this might be a difficult question, can you briefly give us the basic philosophy or basic sort of whatever you call it of at least the 5 top parties, the African National Congress, the Democratic Alliance, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and the Freedom Front? Can you just tell us briefly what they stand for?
Yes. It is.
It's not a difficult question. I thought it was going to be a difficult question.
It is a challenging question because one has to be quite fair. So the current governing party is called the African National Congress. As you know, they have a long history within South Africa. And in order to understand what they stand for, one has to understand the history as well. They were established in resistance to the apartheid government with a focus on the rights of the then oppressed majority, non-white majority within South Africa. And they fought for the rights and equality of the majority of South Africans. They did change in some ways over time. However, most of their philosophy is what we can call nationalism, socialism, and communism. And if you look at the Freedom Charter, for example, as much as I really appreciate the document, because I think South Africa does belong to all who live in it, there are very many communist elements to it. They have currently lost their legacy, but I'm not sure if I should go into a political analysis of it.
No, that becomes too complicated.
The official opposition of South Africa is called the Democratic Alliance. They also have a history within the struggle and a history within South Africa, but they have a slightly different history in opposing the apartheid government. They started at the they started in various parties, from the United Party that then became the PFP, and then eventually became the DP and then the DA. And the big reason, for example, why the PFP broke away from the United Party was because the PFP believed that the land policy of the time within apartheid South Africa did not work. The philosophy behind the Democratic Alliance is the rights for the minorities and the majorities, that all people work together to create an open opportunity society for all. They are challenging to put into one political box. Some people say that they're liberal Democrats, some people say they're constitutional Democrats, but fundamentally, the Democratic Alliance believes in the protection of the Constitution of South Africa and creating a country where everybody can step into their own.
Okay, you've mentioned a lot of things, but I don't think we can go into too much depth.
Unfortunately.
Okay, the economic freedom fighters?
So the economic freedom fighters, they're often described as a quasi-revolutionary breakaway from the ANC. They found that the ANC was they were not extreme.
Too moderate.
They were too moderate. And they found that, and the EFF often says that the negotiation in '94 was a compromise. If you had to put them in a specific political philosophy, it would be National Socialism, but a lot more extreme, and examples of that within other countries, and very much what the EFF punts and believes in would be Zimbabwe and Venezuela.
Okay, right. And the last one, the Freedom Front Plus?
The Freedom Front Plus is a narrow tribal party. They believe in the rights of a very select minority within South Africa. It is the Afrikaans-speaking people. They do still believe that apartheid would have been a better system because it looked after people, but in different ways. And they would be, as with the EFF, but slightly less radical in some ways, also described as racial nationalists.
Okay. Now, what is the role of all these opposition parties? I mean, obviously there are 12 opposition parties, but what does the opposition party actually have to do?
Well, accountability is the cornerstone of democracy, and we are only held accountable by the people around us. And that is where opposition parties come in, whether you're the official opposition or whether you're a single seat opposition member. Your role is to hold the governing party to account, to ensure that the voice of South Africans are heard within the legislature, and to ensure that the governing party does not abuse their power.
Okay. And then I don't think we've got much
time. Just one thing. Opposition parties with hand in hand with civil society have in fact toppled regimes.
Okay, good. Well, let's see how that's going to work. Whether it's ever going to work here. And then lastly, could you explain just briefly the difference between governing and ruling?
Yes. I've been very careful not to call the majority party in South Africa the ruling party, where the majority of South Africans, as well as the majority party, does refer to them as the ruling party. Now, ruling means that you're a monarchy. It means that you're a dictator, and it means that you do not subscribe to the principles of democracy. Our constitution is one of the most, it is the most liberal and the most democratic constitution in the world, which means that we need to protect it. And when you are the custodian of that constitution, you have to govern. And good governance creates a better society. It creates a stronger economy. It creates an economy where people can access, and it isn't based on the characteristics of your birth, but rather the input that you give into society. A democratic society where it is governed means that a child born in the most abject of poverty can become a concert pianist, a surgeon, a TV presenter, or a politician.
Oh, wow. Okay, I think I'm a far more responsible voter now. And thank you so much for all this information. We really appreciate that. And I hope that many, many people will now know better after they've listened to this. Did you know? Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you very much, Joleen. And remember to vote, it's your right.
Yes.